Good morning. We look today at Acts chapter 18. And Paul has been in Athens and teaching about Jesus. And that's what Paul does. And it's just, and he establishes many churches. And so today, as we look at chapter 18, he is leaving Athens and he goes to Corinth. And this is now then the start of the church at Corinth. He is planting the church there. He's met with some Jews at the synagogue who are willing to listen, who have open ears. It says when he got to Corinth, he found a Jew named Aquila, whichever, a native of Pontus, who had come from Italy with his wife Priscilla. And Aquila and Priscilla are two people that we do hear about in the letters to the Corinthians. There are two of those as well. And they had come to Corinth because Claudius, the Roman governor at the time, had ordered all Jews to leave Rome. And, here we have way back in like probably 45, 50 years after Jesus, 50 AD, said that the Roman government ordered all the Jews to leave. And, for whatever reason, the world, some of the other nationalities of the world seem to pick on the Jews. It's just, Hitler, as well as I do, if you've studied history at all, that he persecuted Jews mercilessly. And throughout the ages, they've had a kind of a bad name in so many different ways. And yet they're God's chosen people. And, it seems so strange to me that way. But anyway, Paul went to see them. To stay with them, whichever he was. Paul and Achilles were both tent makers, leather workers, and so that's when it says tent maker, he is not making big leather. He might have made some big tents, but basically it was working with leather, making all kinds of things that way for different people. Leather goods of any and all sort that way, working with the tanning of the hides of the animals. And while he was there in Corinth, every Sabbath day, it says, Paul would go to the synagogue, and again, they use the word argue. Yeah, and maybe Luke likes that word, or the translator of this New Revised Standard Version I'm looking at likes the word argued rather than debated or explained or, had conversations about. But he would have conversations with them, trying to convince them, the Jews and Greeks alike, of the deity, the messiahship, the Christliness of Jesus Christ, that Jesus is and was the promised one that they had been waiting for forever and ever. And then Silas and Timothy come from Macedonia to Corinth to join Paul, and they find, of course, that he was proclaiming the word, and then it kind of almost misleading when you read. It says, when Silas and Timothy arrived from Macedonia, Paul was teaching about them, testifying to the Jews the Messiah was Jesus. When they opposed and reviled him, it almost sounds like Silas and Timothy were, no, but it wasn't. They were coming to reinforce. It was the Jews that opposed Paul and the word of Christ. And, so when people would refuse to hear the word of Jesus, it says that Paul would shake the dust off of his feet and go on to someone else's household and go on. And this is a lesson learned from Jesus as he set his disciples out. And I've commented on that before. It comes up that, if someone doesn't welcome you and the word of Jesus, Jesus said, shake the dust off your feet and just go on to another. And we see that happening. And, so he shakes the dust off and he says to them, your blood will be on your own heads. I'm innocent. He's tired. He's tired now of trying to convince the Jews. And he says, I am going now to the Gentiles. And Paul is known as the missionary to the Gentiles. He spends the majority of his time teaching and encouraging those who are not of the Jewish faith, of the Jewish heritage, Israelites, so to speak, but Paul spends much more time converting Gentiles, heathens, to become believers. He left the synagogue and went to a house of a man named Titius Justus, who was a worshiper of God, whose house was right next door to the synagogue. And it does tell us that there were some of the leaders of the synagogue and others that did come to believe in. But, there had to have been a pretty good contingent of people in Corinth that became believers. I mean, Paul does write 2 letters back to them, and he encourages them. And, it says, many of the Corinthians who heard Paul became believers and baptized. And Paul had a vision that the Lord said to him, do not be afraid, but speak. Do not be silent, for I am with you, and no harm will come to you. He says, for there are many in this city who are my people. So it's even when Paul was getting discouraged and disgusted with the Jews and their refusal to believe, God encourages him and says, there are many here who listen. There are many here who know. And as a pastor, I've often marveled at the number of people that seem to be able to do without going to worship. And I've often wondered, like on Christmas and Easter and those are the 2 big festivals that we celebrate as most all people, but yet it doesn't mean that just because you're a member of a church that you're going to go to worship that day. But yet it's a reminder to me that even though they don't come to worship, they know who God is. Even though they may not feel the need to go to worship and to hear the Word of God, they know the Word of God and they trust the Word of God. And I've seen that come about so often too. And somebody that hasn't been very active, all of a sudden something happens, or they decide to come, and they become much closer to God that way in their worship, and they find out what they've been missing. But anyway, it's a word for all of us, not just me as a pastor, but for all of us, that even though not everybody comes to worship, even though not everybody seems to be willing to hear the Word of God, that there are many that know the Word of God and know that Jesus is Lord, even though they may not live it and show it and share it every day. So, God says, there are many in this city who are my people. And the very next line says, and he stayed in that city for 1 year and 6 months. He's on a missionary journey, but he spends 18 months in Corinth, talking to people, encouraging people, establishing a church, and getting to have a relationship with these people. And that's what our faith in God is, our faith in Jesus. It's a relationship that we get to know them. And you know as well as I do that, for you to know someone, you need to spend time with them. I've got classmates that I haven't seen for many years. I've got friends that I see on a regular basis. Well, those friends that I see on a regular basis are the ones that I am most connected to, most vested in, because I have a relationship with them, a current relationship with them. There are people from my past that if I was to meet them today on the street and start to have a conversation, and if we ended up living in the same community again, that relationship would blossom and grow and be greater again. But it's in having a relationship, establishing who each other is, and valuing that relationship that matters. So here Paul spends 1.5 years in the city of Corinth, even though he has just shaken the dust off of his feet, because so many of the Jews in the synagogue didn't hear. On the flip side, many did. Many did. And that's what's important. And then we go on, it says, when Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews made a united attack on Paul and brought him before the tribunal. So, the Jews bring Paul to the Roman government. And the Roman government, they say this man is persuading people to worship God in ways that are contrary to the law. And this leader says, if it was a matter of crime or of serious villainy, I would be justified in accepting a complaint from you. However, since it's just a matter of questions about words and names of your own law, see to it yourself. You know, this guy and what he's teaching about Jesus have no bearing on me, says the Roman governor, you know. So I'm not gonna waste my time and effort on it. I'm gonna dismiss it. Just go on, get out of here. And so these people seize Sosthenes, the official of the synagogue. They beat him in front of the tribunal, but Gallio shows no concern, you know. And so it's not so long after that Paul does say so long to the believers in Corinth. He's been there, as I said, 18 months, and he sails on to Syria. And he goes there. He's accompanied by Priscilla and Aquila, you know, the ones that he met that had come because of the Jews being told to leave Rome that way. But so Priscilla and Aquila go with Paul on his missionary journey. And as we read on through the rest of chapter 18, I'm not going to talk much about it, but we find Paul stopping at many more cities, and he cuts his hair as is a Nazarite. You know, he does things to encourage others in their belief. He does things not to set himself apart, but to try to be more like them. He goes to Caesarea. He goes to Ephesus. Again, Ephesus, the letter to the Ephesians. He's beginning churches. He's starting churches, and he's revisiting set places again. So he's on his second missionary journey now, and I've always thought in my head, you know, when he's on this missionary journey that it's, you know, travel, you know, with just brief stops. But, you know, here he was 18 months in Corinth, and I don't know how long he was in some of these other places, but he spent considerable time and energy teaching and preaching and convincing people that Jesus is our Messiah.